Huples Cat! Welcome to the Prepper Book Club. On this great book, we have finally reached chapter 5. This is on first aid and hygiene. At 80 pages, it's one of the longest chapters in the book. However, there are a lot of pictures. As a retired nurse, I want to spend a lot of time on this chapter, but I'm not going to. Well, I am going to spend a lot of time on the chapter, but not as much as I could have done. I'm going to point out what I see as errors, and you may or may not agree. And I'll remind everybody yet again, if you are a prepper and you have not done a decent wilderness first aid course, either online or hopefully in reality, you have a huge gap in your prepping. Having said that, in the main, this chapter is decent. It's very small, it's not detailed enough for me, but it will help you if you get yourself in a situation where the world has collapsed around you. I'm particularly grateful that hygiene has been highlighted. Right at the beginning on page 271, they correctly point out that you require a large supply of clean water. Now remember, Selco was under siege but by a river. If he'd had a Life Straw Mission 5 or 12, he'd have had a plentiful pure water supply. He did not. Quoting on page 272, however, when SHTF, it is highly likely the lack of hygiene and sanitation will kill more folks than violence. Cleanliness is of great importance in the prevention of many kinds of infections. Infections of the gut, the skin, the eyes, the lungs and the entire body. Bit of a quibble on this, but actually no, Selco is wrong here. It is not highly likely, it is definite. Disease always kills more in a collapse situation than the violence and the damage. For example, an all-out nuclear war is going to kill maybe 1 billion people, but the fall of society, especially in the Northern Hemisphere, probably going to kill 2 to 3 billion more, purely because of the lack of food and society and medicine, and disease will run rampant and disease will be the major killer. Radiation disease causes infections to go crazy. This is why it's so critically important to know and to train for SHTF hygiene and first aid than it is ever to own a gun, in my opinion. For me, the pages on 274 and 275 shows this clearly to me. I'm not an American. An American may look at reality and see something completely different from what I see. The example of how worm eggs spread on page 274 is particularly important. As I've said before, if you're taking water from a source close to you, have travelled upstream, can it be industrially polluted? Will people poop in it in an SHTF event? Figure it out, look at it. You need clean water. It's not a nice to have, it's an absolute essential. On page 277, Selco actually talks about how to do a wet rag bath. This is actually something that you should have done, and if you haven't done it, you need to do it. I often do it in the winter off grid because I don't have running hot water. It is easier to use a small bowl of water from the fireplace that's hot, and a rag, or a few rags actually, at least 2, one for everything and one for your unmentionables, and wash yourself that way. If you haven't done it, if you haven't camped, seriously consider if you are a prepper or a fantasist. Yes, going without running hot water, yes, camping is uncomfortable. So will be a disaster. If you're prepping for a disaster, it's best if you know what to face in that disaster before it hits. Many preppers have said turn off the water and the electricity and see what happens after 24 hours. Well, this is sort of true. However, never ever do this if it's below freezing in your area because you'll absolutely ruin your pipes and you'll have massive plumbing bills. And I don't actually agree. When preparing for societal collapse, get that tent. Go wilderness camping. That's going to teach you a lot more than sitting in your house with no power and no water. You should have already figured out heating. Now, they talk about actually using plants to clean yourself with. Hard pass over this section. Pretty silly to me. I don't think this is actually going to happen very much, but you know, if you have all of these plants available and can safely identify them, knock yourself out. However, on page 279, they talk about delousing the whole family often. Lice and fleas carry many diseases. If your dirty hair or scalp becomes itchy or problematic, cut it off. It's fine to say in a book, delouse regularly. My question to Selco and Gowan is how? Now, by this point in your prepping journey, you should have a few boxes. You should have some stuff stored for a disaster because it's always important to have stuff. But focus on long term as well as short term. People only focus on short term. Years ago I bought this. I don't have to shave my hair, I can use this. I don't want to be bald in Canada in the middle of winter. Now, lice and fleas are attracted to clean hair. That won't be a problem for you in SHTF if you've adapted to it because you won't be washing daily. You won't be showering every day and having a bath whenever you feel like it. It'll be rare, specific occasions when you do that. Most of the time you'll be using a wet rag. You need to prepare in advance. In Selco and Gowan's massive list of bug out items, this doesn't feature. This is very light, it's useful to have. You also might want to get a manual version as well. They of course talk about pooping. They show a very interesting position to poop. I think they're misinterpreting pooping with going into labour. I poop outside all the time. I'm often on day hikes in the woods, a long way from even a portaloo. I routinely carry a bit of Kleenex with me. Like using a wet rag bath, pooping outdoors requires practice. Have you ever pooped outdoors? Get on it, practice, do it properly, do it cleanly. It It is a skill like any other. So I poop outdoors in all 4 seasons. I've used snow, I've used leaves, I've used anything I can find. Now the list of toilet paper they give is absolutely ludicrous. Snow? Yeah, but it's very cold, but it does kind of work. Sand? Well, I guess, but it'd be pretty gritty. They suggest using rounded and slightly rough stones. I'm not really sure that's a good idea either. As I've said, pine cones do not work. People keep going on about this. They don't work, they're terrible to use, and they hurt. You can use sticks, I don't recommend it. Leaves. Now they do agree with me in doubling them up. You must have them doubled up. A single leaf will always rip no matter how thick the leaf is. You mustn't press too hard. What I do is I dab, and then wipe. They tell you not to use poison oak, poison ivy or stinging leaves. I kind of agree with that. Grass and moss is an excellent option. Wad them up into a clump like a little green scubbing brush. Yeah, moss would work. Grass, no, not particularly. You can try it. I can tell you it will not work. Now water is actually used by large numbers of people all across the world instead of toilet roll. So you can use water, but you need to have running water, and it's not exactly the best for not getting fecal infections. So I just recommend you don't. They also suggest using bark. I really don't agree with that. I think it's insane. You can try it if you want to try it, but it won't work. They do talk about washing clothes, which I enjoyed. However, what I do recommend is you have loads and loads and loads of these. This is a box that contains 384 wash loads of laundry detergent. You won't get a lot of suds, but you will have clean laundry. I use this now. I recommend it. Now you can get a 5-gallon bucket and a plunger. I don't recommend that. What I recommend is you get 2 mechanical laundry machines. They're kind of like huge salad spinners. I've demonstrated them before. I'm not going to demonstrate them now because they're actually sealed away for SHTF. But why 2? Well, one's for your clothing and one's for your toilet rags. For you see, in SHTF, you're not actually going to use toilet paper. You're going to use toilet paper if you have dysentery, you'll use toilet paper if you're sick, or if it's really, really frozen cold outside. But otherwise, you're going to use cotton rags. On pages 286 and 287, they talk about keeping your space clean. I really like this part. It's an excellent idea. Outdoor shoes should never be used indoors, either now or in SHTF. People that walk into your house with shoes on that they've walked around outside are showing you no respect and are showing complete ignorance of disease transmission. It is specifically important that in SHTF you are actually using stuff that you already used and habits you already have before the disaster, because it's going to be very hard to invent new patterns of being in the disaster. They talk about burning waste. I completely disagree with this. Keep all of your waste sorted and stored. Tin cans can make chimneys and pipes later on. The paper on the tin cans can be used as tinder or as writing material. You can put glass in new walls to let light inside. Glass and plastic containers for storage and for sodas. Remember, if a society falls, these items will run out eventually. What is waste now will be treasure in about 10 years' time. Food and feces waste must be composted for gardens. As I said, clothing can be used for toilet paper and for bandages and to repair clothing. Now you can sew, right? Again, that's a prepping skill. If you don't know how to sew, grab a needle and thread and practice. In my household, I'm the sewer. Now, the next 56 pages are a miniature first aid book. As I've said before, you really need a lot of first aid books. You need to have read them and you need to have practiced what they're telling you to do. In Canada, it takes about 4 years to train to be a registered nurse. Another 1 to 2 years to be a really good emergency or ICU nurse. And that's the skill level you're going to need if society's fallen. Now, a book like this is good for me, but I'm a retired trauma nurse. You need a wilderness first aid survival course, a decent one, a 2-day one. Now, I hate to go all timey-wimey on y'all, but you need to time travel. Go back in time to the 60s and 70s. Get a book like this and like this. Designed before digital information, designed before single-use stuff. Gold dust in a disaster. They do a large section on how to poop indoors or outdoors using various plastic single-use items. Again, keep your poop separate from urine and use both as composting materials and figure out how to do it. This is not how to sterilize surgical equipment. It's a really bad idea to do this. It's going to melt the plastic syringe and it's not a good idea. You need to use chemical methods. 100% alcohol is going to do it. Medications are going to be priceless. Store them and keep a decent drug book. I currently have 2 medication boxes, got all sorts of exciting stuff in here, and I'm not going to go through it today. But if you have pets, you can get meds. Get meds, store them. Look about expiry dates. They can last a couple of decades in most cases, or a few don't. And you absolutely have to have a decent drug book. It's 2016. I'm going to reorder another one today. Second hand, of course. It doesn't need to be 2025, but it should be sometime in the 2020s. On page 300, there's a common and usual mistake that people make talking about this topic. To quote, if you have children, it's very important to be sure what kind of antibiotics your child responds to best. Some people react badly to certain antibiotics. Make sure you know what works for you and members of your group or family. Now, they also do mention getting a drug reference book, which I totally support. Children are not small adults. It's a common mistake made by preppers and a lot of first aid people. A child is a different species from an adult. Bear that in mind. If you have children or you're going to treat children, have pediatric books and neonatal books. Don't rely on adult books only. It won't help you. There's a lot of things children cannot possibly take safely that's totally fine for me to take. On page 300, they have a list of medications you should have. And again, they're wrong on some of them. For example, ibuprofen, e.g. Motrin, Advil in North America, pain reliever and fever reducer, good for cases of mild to moderate pain from trauma, sprains, etc. It can also help with fever. No, absolutely not. Do not give ibuprofen or aspirin to anybody who's had a trauma or a sprain. It will increase the bleeding. It will prolong the time of injury. Tylenol only and only if they don't have liver disease. The antibiotic list's sort of okay, but they don't mention that doxycycline expires and becomes dangerous quite quickly. And then they basically just list every medication you could possibly think of and you've possibly seen, and you need to get hold of it all, and most of it is only going to be by prescription, so you're never going to get hold of it. Collect what you can, store what you use, and be very careful in SHTF that you don't undertreat or overtreat people. You need to know a lot of background before the disaster strikes. Get a wilderness survival course. Another common mistake that they make on page 301 is when they tell you to make your own IV infusions and add stuff to it and mix it up. It's almost impossible to do this using sterility, and if you're going to pour it directly into somebody's vein, you really need to know what you're doing, and mixing stuff up yourself that's not sterile to sterile is really problematic to me. Especially because you don't need to do it. If somebody needs rehydrating, use a red rubber catheter, put them on the left side, put the red rubber catheter up about an inch gently, and then pour warmish but not hot or cold water gently into the rectum, clamp it and get them to hold it as long as they can, and repeat as necessary. It's also an ideal method for giving medications to people. It doesn't require much equipment, and it doesn't really require much special knowledge. Better to do rectal hydration than kill somebody from septicemia. If you disagree with me, I'm sure you do, tell me why. Let's have a discussion. Have a great week. Toodles. This has been a Sleepy Terrier production 2025.